In the book of Obadiah, I'll get it right, it's actually the shortest book in the Old Testament. It only has one chapter, if you want to call it a chapter, with 21 verses. And in this book, we see the coming judgment on Edom. When you look at the name Obadiah, his name actually means servant of Jehovah or servant of God. And actually that was a quite common name back in that time period. And actually there were 13 different people that were called by that name throughout the Old Testament. So looking at the book itself, let's consider the background of why Obadiah is writing this letter, this book. And when you look at the background, we need to look at the date. You know, and there's two different dates that proposed when this was written. 845 BC or 586 BC. Because in this book we see where Obadiah refers to an attack on Jerusalem. And studying through the Jewish history, we see that there's two possibilities that could have happened where Jerusalem was attacked. In 848 through 844 BC, in the days of Jehoram, the Philistines attacked the city of Jerusalem. And we read about that in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, starting in verse 8 and following. Then in 586 BC, we see the destruction by the Babylonians. And if you really dig into this book, we see that there's some eternal evidence appears to support the early date. Because the language of Obadiah is much different than from Jeremiah when he's recording the attack on Jerusalem by Babylon. And really in Obadiah, there's no mention of the destruction of the temple. The deportation of the Jews to Babylon, or even the remnant that was left in Jerusalem who went to Egypt. So it's probably the earlier date, 845 BC. And then we need to look at the message, the fall of Edom. The fall of Edom. And we learn there in verse 2 of this book, verse 3 rather, where he writes, "The pride of your heart has deceived you." So we see that the coming of judgment on Edom was because of their pride. And definitely they were very cruel against Israel, who actually are their cousins. So let's look at the history of Edom. The people of Edom descended from Esau. Esau is Jacob's twin brother. And ever since these twin brothers was in the womb, they were fighting each other. Genesis chapter 25, starting at verse 22 through verse 26, we see where the twins struggled in their mother's womb. Then later on in that chapter, we see where Esau sold his birthright to Jacob. And then in chapter 27 of Genesis, we see where Jacob actually stole Esau's blessing as the firstborn. In Genesis chapter 32 and 33, we see where Jacob and Esau eventually reconciled themselves. But yet their descendants was always at odds with each other. In the book of Exodus, not in the book of Exodus, in the Exodus, rather, recorded in Numbers chapter 20, we see where the children of Israel is leaving Egypt, and Edom refused to let them pass through their lands. Then in 2 Samuel chapter 8, we see where David finally subjected Edom. And then during the reign of Jehoram, Edom revolted against Israel. Their land was actually just south of the Dead Sea. And they built their cities in the cliffs and throughout, and thought of themselves as being in I can hear the word in my mind and I can't say it. That they could not be defeated. Impregnable. So we see here where the prophecy of Obadiah. Oh, yes. Obadiah. So in the first 4 verses of this book, we see where the coming judgment on Edom. And we see where Obadiah wrote the vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations, saying, Arise and let us rise up against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be greatly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who dwell in the clefts of the rocks, whose habitation is high. You who say in your heart, Who will bring me down to the ground? Though you ascend as high as the eagle, and though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, says the Lord. Oh, how you will be cut off. Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If grape gatherers had come to you, would they not have left some gleanings? Oh, how Esau shall be searched out, how his hidden treasure shall be sought after. After the men in your confederacy shall force you to the border. The men at peace with you shall deceive you and prevail against you. Those who eat your bread shall lay a trap for you. No one is aware of it. I will not be in that day, says the Lord. even destroy the wise men from Edom, and understanding from the mountains of Esau. Then your mighty men, O Terman, shall be dismayed, to the end that everyone from the mountains of Esau may be cut off by the slaughter. So we see the coming judgment of Edom here in these first. And this decree was actually gone forth to the nations. And we see where Edom was deprived by pride, and in her location, she thought that she was safe and nobody could harm them. But we see where verses 5 and 6, where the destruction is going to be complete. Total destruction. And then the very next verse, verse 7, Edom will be betrayed by their allies. Verses 8 and 9, not even wisdom and might can actually save them at all. And I want you to think about that. Can we be in the same type of judgment as Edom for these reasons? I mean, there's a lot of people today out there that has pride in their hearts. And they deceive themselves. And we can learn so much from this judgment. Then in the next few verses, starting in verse 10, we see the reason for the judgment on Edom. For violence against your brother Jacob. There's one reason. Shame shall cover you and shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried captive by forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem. Even you were as one of them. But you should not be gazed on the day of your brother, in the day of his captivity, nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor shall you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. You should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Indeed, you should not have gazed on their affliction in the days of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. You should not have stood at the crossroads to cut off those among them who escaped, nor should you have delivered up those among them who remained in the days of distress. For the day of the Lord upon all the nations is near, and you have done. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reprisal shall return upon your own head. For you drank on my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. Yes, they shall drink and swallow, and they shall be as though they have never been. So we see in this section, we see where the violence was towards Jacob. And, and it was very unbrotherly on how they fought against each other. And the Lord was not happy with that type of conduct, and he rebuked them against that conduct. So in turn, there in verses 15 and 16, the day of the Lord, for them will mean receiving the same sort of treatment as they done to Israel. Notice verse 17. But on Zion's mountain there shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau shall be stubble. Then shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. The south shall possess the mountains of Esau, and the lowland shall possess Philistia. They shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria. Benjamin shall possess Gilead. And the captives of the host of the children of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. The captives of Jerusalem who are in Shepherd shall possess the cities of the south. Then saviors shall come to Mount Zion to judge the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. So in these last verses, we see where the deliverance and the holiness will be found on Mount Zion. Not on Mount Seir, in which was a prominent mountain in Edom. It's going to be found on Mount Zion. And then we learn that the house of Jacob shall consume the entire house of Esau. The children of Israel will possess Edom and the surrounding nations. And then in verse 21, we see the ultimate rule will be that of the Lord. You know, the fulfillment of this prophecy that we read in this book, one thing we see that the fulfillment of the prophecy was immediate fulfillment with Edom's destruction, in which began actually by Babylon, a Babylon invasion by Nebuchadnezzar. And that battle continued into the 4th century BC. And then here we see where it was completely destroyed. You know, and the ultimate fulfillment that we can glean out of these few verses might likely have been with the coming of the Messiah, Jesus himself. Because with Jesus' coming and the establishment of the spiritual kingdom, in which begins in Jerusalem, in which is called Mount Zion. And then if you think about it, the house of Jacob ended up being the true spiritual of Israel. But what's some of the lessons that we can truly learn from this letter, this book? Number one, pride goes before destruction. Over in Proverbs chapter 16 and verses 18, we learn where pride will lead to vanity and a sense of independence from God himself. Just as Edom took their pride in their geographical location, allies, wisdom, and might, they thought they were safe. But through their own pride, their own arrogance, God did punish them. So in turn, I want you to ask yourself, are we on guard against that type of pride in our own lives? Another lesson that we can learn from this book, do not mistreat your brethren. And that's actually what Edom's guilt was also. They mistreated Israel. And I want you to ask yourself, how do you treat other brethren, and how does that affect our relationship with the Lord? Remember what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verses 12? 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and the verses 12. But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. You sin against Christ. So in turn, we really need to pay attention on how we treat each other. Another thing that we can learn out of this book is, do not rejoice when your enemy falls. And Edom done just that when Judah was plundered, as we read in verse 12 of the text. Because Obadiah writes in verse 12, but you should not have gazed on the day of your brother, in the day of his captivity, nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of their distress. And truly what we learn there, that type of gloating really displeases God. We need to make sure we don't rejoice over our enemies' failures. You know, in the time of divine judgment, God promises a means and place of escape for those who turn to Him. But I want you to notice in verse 17 of this text, but on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance. Today, what do we have? We have a spiritual Mount Zion, don't we? In which at that place we can turn to Him and He can guide us and help us. Because when we do that, it is a place where we can find the city of the living God. The heavenly Jerusalem that we read about in the book of Revelation. The innumerable company of angels. And then the very firstborn who is registered in heaven. At this place, the spiritual Mount Zion, we also know that God will judge all, each and every one of us. We also will find there Jesus, who is the mediator between us and God the Father. So, looking at this book briefly, because the more you study this book, the more you can gain on things that God don't like, and that we can shy away from if we have those type of things in our own lives. But back in our text, we see in verse 15, for the day of the Lord upon the nations is near. There's going to come a day when the Lord's going to end time, and we all will be judged. And we're going to be judged upon the things that we've done here on earth, if it was good or if it was bad. So today, we need to ask ourselves this question. Are we ready for that day when the Lord comes? Are we ready? Because when the Lord comes, it's too late to change. We need to be ready now, because there's no guarantee of tomorrow whatsoever. So if anybody has any needs, why don't you come and stand as we sing the song of invitation.